You're listening to Bigfoot Society, and I'm Jeremiah Byron. Tonight's account comes from a man with 45 years in the logging industry, seasoned hunter, a professional guide, and a trapper who knows the woods like most people know their own backyard. But near a place called Palisades Reservoir, something else was watching the trail. This account is what happened the day he realized he wasn't alone. So stay with us. All right, Bigfoot Society, I've got the privilege of talking to Dave today. Dave's an individual that I got connected to over on the YouTube side of things. And Dave, it's a pleasure to talk to you today. How's it going, man?
Well, it's a pleasure to talk to you, first of all. Thanks for having me on. I'm doing good. I mean, the weather's nice and things are good at the ranch, so I'm ready to talk Bigfoot if you're ready.
Absolutely. Dave, you were nice enough to share a bit with me about your background, and I think it might be beneficial for listeners to know a little bit about your background. Would you mind sharing things that you've been into over the years that you had provided to me before we get into it?
Well, there's a lot in my background.
There is, yeah.
And I'm not quite sure everything I sent to you or we discussed before, but I've been in the logging business. I started out in the logging business in Pennsylvania. And so I run the logging business from basically Buffalo, New York, Orchard Park, all the way down to Wheeling, West Virginia, and across half the state of Pennsylvania. And so pretty big operation, spent over 45 years in the logging and sawmill industry. And I was at a very young age, 5 years old, when I caught my first muskrat. So I spent probably 95% of my waking hours out in the woods in Pennsylvania, New York State, and, northern West Virginia. That being told, I've never even thought about a Bigfoot, never had any weird experiences in those states. But I got involved. I guided in Pennsylvania since I've been, probably 18 to 20 years old. And I bought a place that had an 800-acre estate attached to it. And for 23 years, I outfitted hunters and stuff like that. So, I mean, I've dealt with the public. Nobody's ever had any issues with Bigfoot out there that I know of. But then I got interested in Western hunting and got involved with a fellow by the name of Mike from Jackson. And he wanted me to write a few articles for him. And so I did. And he got me over here on the other side of the mountain range into a place, I'll just say, Swan Valley in Idaho. And so that's where I live and reside today. But things changed as far as the Bigfoot world. I mean, I was to Alaska. I've hunted Alaska numerous times. Never had any issues other than with grizzlies. And I've been a professional hunter pretty much my life, and have taken dozens of scores of people out and guided in Wyoming. Never had any issues with Bigfoot over there. But Idaho, the southeast corner of Idaho, seems to have a lot of Bigfoot activity. And I also gold mine. That's another thing I do every summer. Matter of fact, I'm getting ready to go gold mining again this summer. I'm going up as we speak in 2 days. I'm going to do some prospecting. But anyhow, that's led me into some Bigfoot encounters. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure, later in the show. But so my life has been out in the woods. And but in this southeast corner by Palisades Reservoir, I've had encounters. And whenever you're ready, Jeremiah, well, I suppose we'll start sharing them. Is there anything else you'd like to know about my background before we go?
Thank you for sharing that, Dave. I think that's important that listeners know that in this case, you have a lot of background being in the woods, guiding people, fishing, hunting. Even though we know you as Dave, you're pretty accomplished for things that you've done over the years, and I have some info regarding that to the side. But, Dave, I'd love to hear more about, was there a certain time that you realized that there was more going on in the woods than just these animals that you were hunting as a guide?
Well, I would say I've been out in Idaho since 1987, and for, I would say, approximately 10 years, I've never encountered anything that I could put my finger on as out of the ordinary. Although I did watch it as a kid, like a lot of us probably listening, the what was it, Boggy Creek, Legend of Boggy Creek, and I thought that was cool, but I never really gave it any thought until, like I said, I moved to Idaho, and I would say things started happening around 1998, and quite frankly, I ran into something that was literally amazing. They talk about this skookum cast because I watch Bigfoot stuff now. I watch David Palisades and stuff like that, and reputable, and listen to encounters on this show. And I find that there's an awful lot of people that have had encounters. And a friend of mine by the name of Becky Cook wrote a book about Bigfoot, and it says the title reads "Bigfoot Lives in Idaho," and she devoted a whole chapter to some of my encounters and weird, unexplained happenings. I'll put it that way, because if I don't see it, I don't believe it. But there are things that's happened to me that there is no explanation, because, like I said, I've been out in the woods since I've been 5 years old. I'm going to be 72. And I've spent literally 90% of my, even at this day and age, 90% of my waking time is in the outdoors. So it's extraordinary when something like this happens to you and you remember it. Is there anything else that you want me to put into that time frame, or?
I would say that does sound good. It's interesting you bring up Becky Cook. I know she's known for writing a few books about Idaho Bigfoot. I think she's no longer with us. But
right. Yeah, she passed away here about a year and a half ago. Yeah.
But if listeners want to hear more about encounters in Idaho, I would recommend try to track those books down if you can. But yeah, Dave, I am knowing that you are also featured in one of Becky's books, which I did not know. I'm very, very curious to hear what had happened to you out there.
Well, do you want me to start from the first Bigfoot encounter? You want me to skip around and give you the most scary encounter first? You tell me what you want to hear.
I found that from talking to a lot of people over the years, it's interesting to hear chronological, if possible, because there's always seems to be a path that is followed, maybe a few different paths, but it would be really interesting to hear what your first encounter was.
Okay, well, the first encounter happened while my buddy George and I were hunting, and it was our typical routine. We would go out pre-dawn, get up in a section, and glass, looking for big mule deer bucks, and of course, not even looking at the smaller ones, but we would do that. And then about 11 o'clock, the bucks, especially the big boys, are all gone after 20 minutes of daylight. But we'd watch in glass and look for elk or whatever until about 11 o'clock. We'd eat a little bit of lunch, and then we would take turns sleeping. Well, this one particular day, beautiful bluebird day, very little wind. George said, "Oh, I'm going to take a nap." So about he would sleep to about 1:30, and then I would go to try and take a rest from 1:30 to 3, and we'd get up and glass till dark and head back to camp. We used to pack in with llamas, so we were right up. We didn't have to travel a long way to get back to camp. We always camped right up in the mountains where we were hunting. And the one particular day, I was up there and I was just playing with a chipmunk. And because when I was a little kid, my grandma used to put peanuts in my hand, and the chipmunks would come up and take a peanut and run away with it. And I thought, well, I'm going to see if I can train one of these wood chipmunks. So all I had was some of these Lance cheese and peanut butter crackers. And so I cut off a piece and I threw it on the ground, and the little chippy came up and he ate it. And the next thing you know, I got him. He was climbing up on my leg, but he wouldn't come up to my hand. This has been going on. And I looked up from the chipmunk. Something caught my eye, and I looked down by this pine tree, which was about, I'm trying to figure out, it was probably 40 feet. Yeah, 40 to 60 feet away. And that pine tree was probably, at that time, 11 foot tall. I was just back here last year, and now it's probably 25 or 30 foot tall. But anyhow, there was a elk path, a game trail. Let's just call it a game trail. Came out right there, and we would sit right above that, not looking for anything on that game trail, but basically looking at there's 3 trails down the hill, and they would come out and it'd be perfect shooting. So George is sleeping. I'm there playing with the chipmunk, and I look, and here's this big, dark brown, chestnut brown thing standing there. And I says, well, that's a moose. And I says, wait a minute, that'd have to be an off-colored moose. And I looked, and so I moved a little bit, and this thing was looking right at me. And it never blinked. It wasn't a moose, wasn't a bear. It had a head that was probably, I'm thinking, 16 inches wide. I said, wow. And I could see the one eye, the corner through the pine tree. He was studying me through the branches of a pine tree. And this pine tree is about 4 foot down slope. And I'm looking straight across at his eyes. This animal had to be, I'd say, 9 to 10 feet tall. Really. And I think that's no over exaggeration. This animal's studying me. I'm playing with the chipmunk. I'm looking at this thing. I'm dumbfounded. And the guns, or 2 guns, are set against a windblown pine tree that had been rotted. It's all white and bleached out. They're laying there. They're on the other side of Georgia, unfortunately, or fortunately. But I looked over at those guns, and when I looked back at him, something changed with his demeanor. I don't know how to explain it in words, but the expression that I could read from his eyes changed. And I was no longer concerned with the chipmunk. I was on my butt, so I moved over closer to George. He was watching me. He didn't move. And I looked at the guns again. And when I turned, he was gone. Now, this thing had I saw, let's see, the left side of his shoulder was probably protruding about 30 inches to 3 foot from his head. I didn't see a neck. I could only see one half of his head. I saw part of his nose. Could see part of his mouth. I didn't see any teeth. I didn't see anything like that. But that eyeball, it looked just like my eyeball, except it was the size of bigger than a silver dollar. The pupil, the colored part, but and a big eyebrow. That's all I saw of him. Other than through the pine tree, I could see part of his width, but he was turned. If he was walking up that trail, he would have been turned to the left, and he stood there motionless. But the funny part of it is, when I looked at the guns the second time, turned around and looked at him, he wasn't there, and there was no noise. It's just like he vanished, just like poof, like in a, I don't know, a cartoon, where the fairy godmother puts a wand down and poof, something's gone. And that was my first encounter right there. And then that same year, in the evenings, we heard, I don't know how to explain it. It was like an Oriental language down in the pines, down at the bottom of the basin. Never saw anything. And I told George, he even commented, he said, who's speaking Chinese down there? And why are they speaking out loud like that? It was a dialect. It sounded like an Oriental. I'm not familiar with all dialects, but it sounded like that. It was almost like words, but it wasn't words. And twice in that year, and once in a subsequent year, we heard that down in that basin. And I would say that would be the extent of that encounter on that side. And then,
Dave, can I ask you a few questions about that real quick? Sorry.
Sure.
So this was in southeast Idaho, you said?
Yeah, on it'd be on the western side of Palisades Reservoir.
Okay, gotcha. So it sounds like when you were able to see its eyeball, it actually did have a pupil, and I would take from that you could see a white area of its eyes, or was it all colored?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was white. It was more like yellow, but it was lighter than the center. Yeah, that I recall, but that's been quite a few years. But it reminded me of a human being's eyeball, but it was just huge.
You'd said that the left side of the shoulder is 3 feet from the neck. I want to make sure I heard it right. So 6 feet across, it sounds like?
I would think so, because he was turned quartered toward me, and I could see. That's what I spotted first. I didn't see the head and the eyeball. I saw that big blob, which was his shoulder and his arm, torso, left side. And then I kept looking, and then I noticed the head and the eye looking at me through the trees. In other words, he was screened by this pine tree, but he was looking through the pine tree, standing there looking at me. And I don't know how long before I spotted him, he was there, because he didn't just appear there. He might have been there for 5 minutes watching me play with that chipmunk. I don't know.
Absolutely. He disappeared.
And he disappeared. Right.
It sounds like there were no branches moving. It just, you said, just disappeared.
Just disappeared. And I know he couldn't have went forward on the trail. He'd have been exposed. He turned around and went back the way he came, down into the dark timber. But I never heard a sound. Now, that any hoofed animal that's going to depart quickly, you're going to hear it. Now, a bear, a mountain lion, Bigfoot, any soft-footed animal, I'll just say it. I'll put it that way. They don't make that kind of noise, especially on a trail that is groomed to be free of branches and stuff. It's a well-used trail. And so he disappeared without a sound. I didn't hear any big thumps or anything like that. He was just gone. That was it. And if I did hear it, my brain didn't register it.
Right.
That's what I can tell you.
When did you go over to where it was standing at all to see if there were any tracks? Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah, because I shook George and woke him up. He says, "What's going on?" And I says, "You ain't gonna believe this. this huge thing was just standing there. Ah, he says, you don't know what you're talking about. And so I said, yeah, I'm telling you. He stood there and watched me playing with his chipmunk. But anyhow, yeah, that's what and we went down there and we looked, and I didn't see anything. I didn't know then to look for Bigfoot tracks. Since then, I've seen dozens and dozens of Bigfoot tracks, casted a few, and whatever. But at that time, there was just no tracks on it. It was just a 30-inch wide trail, beat down with elk and deer tracks. But there was no elk and deer tracks right there. There wasn't any there. It was just plain smooth red dirt. Gotcha. And what if there was a track there? I didn't recognize it. There probably was a track there, probably numerous tracks, but I didn't recognize them. I didn't know what I was looking for.
Absolutely.
At that time. So,
did you have horses with you in addition to llamas, or just the llamas?
Just llamas.
Okay.
Yeah.
And during that time, were the llamas reacting in any way, or not?
No,
really?
They weren't there. They weren't there. But I will tell you a circumstance where the llamas did react.
Okay.
It wasn't at this on this certain situation here, this certain day. No, they were back at camp. We would never take them unless we needed to pack something out, and then we would go back, get them, and put the panniers on and get moving.
Makes sense. Had you heard I guess I should ask, have you heard the Sierra sounds at all?
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. I've heard of them. Whether I've actually heard them, I don't think I really actually did hear. Maybe I did once or twice, but didn't register anything to me.
Okay. It would be interesting if you were able to, like, if you search for Sierra sounds on YouTube, it would be interesting to see if what you had heard, that Oriental language, if it was similar to what Ron Moorhead had captured in the Sierras of California.
Well, I'll check it out. I'll let you know.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. Sure. Okay. So after this is your first experience. That's a wild first encounter. And then did this set you down a trail of like, man, I got to figure out what I am dealing with, or it just started to come more and more into your life as you went along?
Well, I'm inquisitive. Mm-hmm. I want to know what's going on. And it changed my hunting patterns a little bit. Let me tell you. And all those years in the woods, I started looking around behind me. I never wanted to run into one face in face, but I did. Unfortunately, about 3 or 4 years later in the early, I can tell you what date that was.
Okay.
That was the opening day of mule deer season in 2014, which would have been, I think, October 5th. And it was at 6:20 in the morning. I remember that one because that was my most terrifying encounter with one of these things. Do you want me to?
I would be, well, before we get into that, so were there any other ways that it had affected how you hunt besides looking over your shoulder? Did you start to notice things when you're out there? You're like, anything out of the ordinary? They're like, well, maybe that's connected to Bigfoot as well.
I started looking for tracks. Mm-hmm. I started looking and being more observant. I'm a trapper. So trappers by their very nature, very little gets by them. If they're looking for fox tracks, they're looking for fox tracks. And you'd be surprised. Like, I can track it in the bare dirt. I'm a good tracker. But was never accustomed to looking for Bigfoot tracks. But I saw a lot of tracks over the course of years that I thought were just big bear tracks, and now I often wonder because they have the toe pattern that would be similar depending on the topography of where they stepped, and I think there's a lot of misidentification of Bigfoot tracks that are, in fact, hindfoots of bears or double-step bear tracks. Double step meaning one bear track steps in another bear track, and it makes it look longer or wider or whatever. And so, but I'm very astute in that realm of looking for tracks. As far as looking for scat or broken branches, I never give that much thought. Now, I even forgot about that till I was talking to you. Structures. I've seen some things on Bigfoot, Expedition Bigfoot. They're talking about nests and structures and stuff. And I actually run across two structures, and I have a picture with my buddy standing inside of one. And it's that was an experience. I think we were out putting bear bait in, and that's when I actually cast the track. Was in the spring of a year. I said to him, I says, "Holy smoke, stop the truck." I said, "Big grizzly come down across the road." Well, it wasn't a big grizzly, it was a Bigfoot. And so I cast the track the next day, and that's the cast I still have today in my possession. But I've seen lots of tracks, a lot better casting tracks too. But I don't carry plaster of Paris with me when I'm hunting. So I don't.
Oh, sure, yeah.
I'm not going to walk like 4 miles to cast a Bigfoot track,
Absolutely. I mean, that is very heavy stuff to carry in addition to everything you're carrying as a hunter. How long was that track that you had casted?
It was about 8.5 inches wide and 18.5 inches long.
Oh, wow. Nice. Okay. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good.
And we trailed it. I said to him, I said, "Look at that wet grass. You can see where it went down through there." His prints, he was coming down a slope, I would say about a 7-degree slope off of a 90-degree angle. Anyhow, a slight slope off the road, and his tracks were 72 inches apart. I put a ruler on it. From the one track, the middle of one track, to the middle of the track I cast was 72 inches. He had 2 more steps across the road, and then he went down through a bunch of junipers with some grass that was about 10 inches tall. Nice thick grass, great grazing grass for animals. He went down through there. You could see the prints because he must have crossed after we went up, is what I think. And coming back down the road later is when we saw the track. But, we followed it down, and he went down to the creek. The creek was, I would say, and this is interesting. This is really interesting. I'd say the creek was running high because of the snow melt. I'd say it was 16, 17 inches wide at that point. And you could see where he stepped on the willows, turned a rock, and then he jumped. He must have jumped. And I'm a gold miner, so I'm used to looking in creek beds. And there was only one rock disturbed, and it was about three feet from the other bank. And it got flipped, and it was a rock probably about 20 pounds. And then you could see where he went up, and he took a game trail right up over the hill. You could see the tracks right there, but I never thought to go over there. I didn't want to get wet. All I had was hunting boots on. I didn't want to cross the creek. So, but I eventually cast that track the following day.
That's incredible. So 6 foot, you said 72 inches.
Exactly.
Yeah, 6 foot. And how would you describe the gait of what you were looking at when you were following the tracks?
Straight like a cat.
Okay.
Yeah. When you follow a mountain line, it just goes straight line, beeline, and that's what this was. 1 foot, like a white man walks like a duck, and an Indian will walk straight line, but more like an Indian.
That's fascinating. So you were definitely starting to notice things in addition to your normal hunting. I am really interested to hear about what happened that opening day of mule deer season in 2014.
Well, that was the most scariest day of my life. What happened is, starting in August, I usually get up in the high country and I glass for trophy bucks. And lo and behold, this one year, I spotted 3 trophy bucks. And then the one day in late August, or no, it was late September actually, I spotted the same 3 bucks. They would come out. I had them patterned pretty good. I'd go up once a week and I'd glass before daylight, about a mile and a half away, and I'd watch these bucks. And anyhow, here come just an absolute phenomenal buck. These bucks were big. They were all over 30-inch inside spreads, and this buck that came up behind him was probably 38. And with cheaters, he was well over 44 inches wide. I mean, he was a hog. He was in the top echelon of the record books, believe me. And I said, wow, I know where I'm going the first day. I said, I'm not going to bother him anymore. I got it this pattern. I got to be there. So when I hunt trophy bucks, I don't use a flashlight. You see people all the time using headlamps to get to where they're going. Well, if you're going to use a headlamp, these trophy bucks, they're sitting up there with their feet and they see a headlamp. They already know the jig is up, so they get into hiding right away. And all you're doing is seeing small bucks. But the big ones are still there. Anyhow, so I walk up this trail. This trail is about a 2-mile jaunt up into where these bucks come out in this meadow. So I had a buddy from Pennsylvania come with me. He came and I said, we'll use the lights on the valley because there's no way they can see down in there. And then once we get up around the corner, it's lights off. So we did, and got up there, and I told him where to go. I said, just follow and this was walking in a horse trail. I said, just go over there about 3/4 of a mile. You're just going to see a group of aspen trees. You stand there, get into the brush a little bit, just stand there and take it easy. And these bucks are going to come out between me and you. And if you shoot, they're going to run up toward me, and something's going to happen. One of them's going to be laying on the ground. So we had a plan. I went up this draw. I didn't want to go out in the meadow because possibly there'd be elk there or anything else out in the meadow feeding before daylight, and they would scare these animals. So I said, I'll stay out of there till shooting light. So I go up in this draw off to the left of this meadow. I've been in that draw a dozen times. I knew my way around. I got up in there and I just took the gun off my shoulder, propped it against a tree, and I'm standing there. Looked at my watch. You press a button on the watch. It said 20 after 6. I said, well, I got about 20 minutes, and then I'm going to work my way over, get out. I know where I'm going to be in the meadow and cover it. So I'm standing there, and all of us, I heard a stick, just like a small stick, a 1/4 inch around, just crack. And I said, well, there's something there. And it was probably 80 yards from me, maybe 100 yards. And I couldn't see anything. It was pitch dark. I don't have a light on. I'm just standing there in the dark. This animal, screams so loud and then roars and then growls at me, all without taking a breath. And this whole situation lasted probably 8 to 10 seconds. It was just amazing. But it was so loud, it about blew me over. I mean, when you were a kid, kids can relate to this, and you went to a dance, you'd go, and if you got too close to the stage, the speakers would reverberate right through your chest. That's what this was. And I said, and I knew better that it was nothing in nature that could do that. There's no way. The volume was too great. I jumped. I'm a small person. I'm 5'8", but I jumped 4 feet off the ground, and I was scared to death. I grabbed my gun. I ran out into the meadow. As far as the heck with the deer. I ran out in that meadow because I figured this thing was coming after me. I ran out there, probably about 80 yards into the meadow. It's wide open, just a little bit of sagebrush. And I said, well, if that thing comes out and it's coming after me, it's going to have 5 shots in it because I'm a pretty good shot. I don't miss very much. And for the first time in my life, which is I broke the cardinal rule. I took my safety off my gun. I was so scared to death. And I was ready. I said, I'm not going to monkey around. I was ready. I had my safety off my gun, and I didn't have nothing to shoot at. And I've never done that, and I've never done it since. But I was scared to death. And this thing never moved that I know of until about 10 minutes later. And I heard 3 little pine sticks. I don't think they were a 1/4 inch, but I could hear it moving up the draw. It would have passed about 40, 50 feet from where I was standing. I could tell, I could listen to it walking. But I couldn't see down in there because, like I told you, it was a ravine. Now, why did this animal scream? I asked myself that question. Well, the deal is until the sun comes up and warms the hillsides, the thermals run downhill. That's why hunters, time and time again, make a mistake. They always walk the top of the hills before the sun's up and warms the basin. Well, if you do that, everything down slopey knows you're up there. They don't have to see you. This Bigfoot wasn't going to go out in that meadow. He was crossing over. He was doing the same thing I was doing, using that ravine for cover. Except there I was, and then he got a whiff of me. So I scared him, or her, is what happened. And that's why the scream. And then that roar was a reaction, I think, to get mad. And the growl was, I'm coming through, get out of my way. To me, that's the way I interpreted it. And believe me, I got out of his way as fast as my little legs could run. I run right out in that meadow and up over the bank of the ravine and out in the meadow. But that was the scariest encounter of my life. And to add to that, that was about 4.5 to 5 miles from where my first encounter happened. And the track I cast was directly in the middle of those 2 encounters down next to the road. So it's interesting, to say the least. And my buddy that years later, matter of fact, only about 5 years ago, came out humming. And I told him, same meadow. I said, you stand here. I'm going to make a 1.5 mile, 2 mile pass through the timber here. If there's something in there, I'll boot it out across the meadow. Well, when I got out there, he broke my cardinal rule. He wasn't where I told him to be. And I thought, where in the hell is Don at? And Don was nowhere to be found. I thought, well, I'm going to walk up to the top and get a better view. Maybe I can see him, spot him someplace. I walked up to the top, and here he comes. And he's all excited. I says, what'd you see? What'd you see? He says, you got to come down here. You got to come down here. I found a Bigfoot track. I said, what? Yeah, he says, I found a Bigfoot track. So he was up there looking for me because he was so excited about the Bigfoot track. So he says to me, he said, you got plaster of Paris in your truck. Go down and get it. I says, it's three miles down there from where this Bigfoot track is. You want the track cast, you go down because I got to walk 3 miles back. That's 6 miles. Now he wants me to walk 12 miles. I said, no way. But anyhow, we took pictures, or he took pictures of this track and by his footprint and all that. Now that was a smaller track, but it had the toes. It was a perfect track to cast. It was in, it must have rained or something. And it was in some mud there. And it had crossed the trail and just left a perfect print. But it was about, I took a dollar bill. I think I measured the dollar bill there on that track, and I think it was 16.25 inches long and about 6 inches wide. But it was barefoot. It was, you actually could see lines in it. I guess they call them ridges or whatever they call them, but you could see it in there. It was a perfect track to cast, but I wasn't about to walk 12 miles to cast a Bigfoot track. But that was the most scariest incident anyhow in my Bigfoot encounters, but I got a few more and a little closer.
So,
Yeah.
So far, everything that you've said all happens relatively close around this Palisades Reservoir, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I know where they cross. I've seen 20 tracks cross a dirt road in this one spot. Bigfoot tracks. If you go there, invariably you will in that 100-yard section run across Bigfoot tracks crossing this dirt road. They got to swim the reservoir to get to the other side.
Sure.
But it's a probably 550 yards across there, and they go right down that steep bank, and they go right down there. I assume that they cross the reservoir and go over into the timber because there's nothing on this side other than rocks and a few junipers and buckbrush. That there's nothing there for them, So, but that's where they go. They go down there and they cross that every time. Every time you can look there, and if you look there and you traveled that road every day in the course of from I would say mid-May to mid-October, you're going to see Bigfoot tracks probably 2 or 3 times in there.
Wow, that's incredible.
And I'm not the only one that's seen it.
Oh yeah,
seen them there.
You've heard other people that have also had accounts.
I know personally. Other people, their sons, they've run it. Actually, they got scared out of their fishing one time. They took a boat across and they got scared out of there. These things were hollering at them, so they had to get in a boat and leave right before dark.
Oh wow, it's crazy how this is also pretty close to the Wyoming border, right?
Yes, it is. Alpine, Wyoming is at the upper end of Palisades Reservoir. Swan Valley is at the lower end. The breastworks, the dam itself.
Right. I've heard some Bigfoot vocalizations in Oregon, and I know what it did to me physically. When you heard those, did you have any physical reactions? I guess you did mention that it was like you were standing too close to speakers at a concert. Did it affect you in any other ways as well, or is that the main way?
It just scared me. I couldn't hunt normally for 3-4 years. I had to stay out in the open where I could see. Normally I'd go right in the timber and still hunt. I love to still hunt. I sneak up on animals all the time, but after that I stayed. I actually have to admit I stayed out in the open where I could see if something was coming. I just, because I hunt by myself a lot.
Sure.
And so I just, I'll be honest with you, I was scared. And it took me a few years to get over it. I've had, and this year, let me see, how far would that be as a crow flies? About 1.5 miles, I would imagine. Maybe, about 1.75 miles from where my encounter happened. And the Bigfoot have been gone over in that country. But I can tell you stories of outfitters that have had clients that paid a lot of money to go hunting. And they wanted to leave the first day because right where I put my friend by the aspen trees, they were there the first day elk season. And 2 Bigfoot started throwing stuff at them. And these guys, they were from out of state. They got so scared. They said, we don't care what. We want to leave now. They went back, and at 1 o'clock, the outfitter came back with his group of hunters. And these guys, they said, we're out of here. We don't want nothing to do with this place. And so they forfeited their money, and the outfitter took them out.
Oh, my goodness. Wow. And I'm not a huge, I'm not a huge outdoors guy. So, but from what I've heard from people, like if you're paying to go on something like that, it's usually at least, it's a good amount of money to forfeit.
Yes. Yeah. They forfeited their fee. They were supposed to spend a week there. Wow. And they forfeited it. They said, no more. We want out. They were scared to death. And it's funny when Bigfoot or more than one, which I can't substantiate, move into an area, it seems like the game leaves. I went back up in there looking around after that encounter. When the snow hit, I said, I'm going to go up and take pictures of this animal's tracks, this Bigfoot tracks. And I said, he's up in there. I'm sure of it. Well, I know every inch of that country. I never ran across a Bigfoot track. But you know what was funny? I never ran across a deer track or an elk track or a bear track or a mountain lion track. And that is, well, it's weird. It's not, I've never seen that. And I covered 10 miles that day. The only thing I saw was a couple pine marten tracks and a red squirrel track and all that. I didn't even see a grouse track, and there was 8 inches of fresh snow. There should have been tracks all over. It was a perfect day. And I didn't see anything, nothing. The place was dead. It was like I was the only living creature in 10 miles.
That's really interesting. Did it affect the sounds of the forest as well when you're out there?
I honestly can't say, but on that snowy day, there wasn't a sound. There was nothing. I was the only living creature in that area. Right. No moose tracks, no elk tracks, no deer track. Unbelievable. Just unbelievable. And I mean, I know where to look and I know where to go. And when you don't see anything, no beds, no nothing. It was devoid. And the outfitter that had that place up there saw me beaver trapping several years later. I don't know what they call Bear Creek. He was coming out with a string of pack horses and removing his camp. And he said, hey, I know who you are. And he recognized my truck. And so we started talking. And he told me a couple Bigfoot stories. And that was pretty interesting. But he told me, he says, I can't figure out why there's no animals up there in this one area. I says, well, that's because Bigfoot moved in. And when I said that, he just looked at me funny. He says, you actually believe that stuff? I says, I never did until it happened to me and I've seen it. But you know what? I got to tell you one thing about that first incident, Jeremiah, that I don't know how to explain it, but that first incident that happened to me with the chipmunk and the crackers and the Bigfoot and George sleeping, my memory wiped that out for years until I had a horse accident and it broke my neck. And when it did, well, I'm lucky to be alive and not a paraplegic, believe me, because it split my C1 clean across vertebrae. And that traumatic injury, my daughter came over to the hospital. They thought I was going to, whatever, but I pulled through. And I don't know what brought it up, but she mentioned that first Bigfoot encounter. And I had forgotten about it, but I had told her about it, and she reminded me. And then it all came back clear as a bell. And I remember clear as a bell today, but for a period of probably 8 years or 10 years, I forgot completely about that. It was removed from my, from my memory. Don't ask me how, why. I can't explain it. But the real scary one up there, mule deer hunting, that one I never forgot. So I can't explain that. But yeah, that was funny about that first encounter. And then in that same area, I had another encounter. And this, I remember I mentioned about, you asked me about the llamas.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so we had 3 llamas. My son, he was there, Dave Jr., and my daughter. And I think there was one other person there at that time. I think it was Whitey. But anyhow, we were camped there in tents, and it was just getting dusk. And there was branches, and it sounded like a freight train coming through the woods. And I said, oh, you guys get your guns. There's a herd of elk coming. The llamas normally whinny like horses when they're scared. And they would have normally just opened up, and they make these shrill sounding whinnies, I guess you'd call them. But they just had their ears perked up, and they were looking right at that steep bank right across from our camp. Well, this animal, which I thought was a group of animals, stopped right across from the llamas on a side hill that had a 70-degree slope, 75-degree slope, almost a cliff. Stopped, just stopped. Never moved. It turned dark. I said, well, I don't know what's going on. And a couple times I looked over there and I thought I saw dark spots, but at that time of night, shade in the pine trees makes dark spots. So I just dismissed it. Well, about 1 in the morning, being an older fella, you have to get up and do your business. So I was going to get up, and I turned the little pen light on. And when I turned the pen light on, something went right by the tents. It wasn't a hoofed animal. That I can swear to. Now, whether it was a Bigfoot or not, I don't know. But it was big, and it pounded the ground. And when it ran up that trail, it went thump, 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 going up that trail. I don't know what it was. But I believe it was Bigfoot because it was on 2 legs. It wasn't a 4-legged animal. I know darn well it wasn't. So that happened, and that's right in the same area. Just, so there was a lot of activity right around that area in a time frame of about 3 to 7 years. They were there. That's all there was to it. They were there. And the chatter that I heard, George and I've never heard that since. And I've never heard a scream or a roar or a growl like that since. But what happened, well, you said you want to go in chronological order, but maybe I ought to cover southeast Idaho first. Is that okay?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Well, last year, I'm hunting elk about 1.5 miles away from there. And I'm up in there. I look over, and there's some hunters over there. They always glass this one spot. If they listen to this, they know exactly who they are. And they know who's talking here. But anyhow, I go up in there, and I'm hunting elk, and I call 2 bulls in. But I couldn't see their heads, and they were with cows, so, you just don't shoot unless you're shooting your target. So I didn't shoot, but never did get the bulls. But I went up higher on the mountain, and I looked and I said, wow, look at that green grass. There must be some water over there. Well, there was. There's a spring seep there. And I've hunted that country for since 1987. I've never known that spring seep to be there. And it's big. It's a pool of water, probably 25 feet long by 4 feet wide. And I walked down. I'm looking for elk and deer tracks. There was a lion track there. There was a bear track there. There was one pretty nice buck track there that I spotted. And there was numerous elk beds around and tracks. And you could smell elk there. And I'm standing there, and I look down at my foot. I'm looking for tracks. And I'm standing on some ordered ground. And I look, and there's a Bigfoot track. It's probably 17. It wasn't as big as the one I cast, but close. 17-inch class Bigfoot track. I'm standing right in the middle of it. I said, rats. I didn't even see it. But I took a photograph. And then I looked in the mud hole, and I said, hey, there's this track going in the mud hole or in the spring seep. So I said, well, I'm going to take a picture of it. And then I see where he came out of the spring seep. There's another track, so I took a picture. And I took it down to Walmart in Idaho Falls to get developed. And this girl, I'm not good on this kind of stuff. I said, can you help me get these developed? And she says, hey, why did you lay down in that mud hole? I says, what are you talking about? Well, she says, there's the outline right there a person laying in a mud hole. Well, there's a perfect picture right there of a Bigfoot laying in that mud hole. I never even noticed it when I was there. I was just taking a picture of the tracks. And that was last year. That was I think it was third day elk season. I believe it was third day. So that had been, the 18th of October last year. And I would say where he laid down in there. And his arms and legs are there. His cone head's there, the whole bit. No neck. It's all right there. It's in the photographs. I got the photographs. And made copies of it. But anyhow,
sorry. Dave, can I jump in for a minute? That's kind of that's a huge deal, like a really, really big deal.
So I never even noticed it.
That's wild. It's like kind of like this. You mentioned it earlier. The Skookum cast is kind of similar to that, but a little different.
Well, this puts the Skookum cast to shame.
Oh yeah,
I'm telling you, I just don't know who to give it to. I called Meldrum over there because I've met Jeff a couple times over, at Pocatello there at the university, but he hasn't replied to me. I told him what I had, and he hasn't replied to me. So I don't know who else to give it to. Maybe I'll send it to you, and you can do something with it.
I would love to take a look at it if you would be open to sending over, however you can do that. Yeah.
Sure, I'll send. I made 2 copies of they're 8x10s, so you can see it. You'll see it. It's so obvious. The big long arms. He laid right down in that thing, and of course, in October, who in the heck's going to lay in a spring seep with an average water temperature of about 38 degrees? Now I figure he did that the last part of September or the first part of October, but you can see the outline. It's all muddy. You know what I mean? Cloudy is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
But it was weeks before, I got there. But yeah, the tracks are right there. I'll send you the photographs after we're done.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'd love to take a look at it. That would be great.
Oh yeah, yeah. You'll be shocked. And this isn't I don't know what they call them, doctored or anything like that. I just took the picture. Like I said, I didn't even see the outline. The woman in Walmart, she's the one that commented. I said, "Holy smokes! Look what!" And I flipped out. I said, "Wow, I really got something." So I went to a guy that actually cast my cast for me, and I showed him. He says, "Well, that's no animal. It has to be Bigfoot. Look at the footprints." I said, "Yeah, look at the footprints. One in and one out, and that footprint was probably." I'd say about 4.5. I'd say about 52 inches to maybe 58 inches from where it laid down in the water.
Wow!
Laid down in the water. You'll see. I'll send it to you. And you can measure. The outline of the animal was probably about 7.5 feet, maybe 8.
Sure. Wow.
Yeah, but it's there. It's obvious. I mean, anybody that's got 2 eyeballs in front of them can tell what it is.
Gotcha. The question I had real quick. So I've talked to a few guys from Montana, which is kind of in the same area up there, right? Kind of. And I always hear a lot of really interesting accounts where, to tell you the truth, they're kind of vicious. But from down in this area, everything that you've experienced, and you've kind of been told a lot of stories as well, do you feel that there's any of them that would also fit that? Or does it kind of sound like maybe they're just trying to get people out of their area in different ways?
Well, first of all, the one that scared me, I scared it just as bad.
Sure.
I believe that. And I've had encounters in where I go gold mining up by Elk City, Idaho, in north central Idaho. I've had a couple of encounters up there, seeing tracks, played around with rocks, and actually came down and put a rock on top of my rock. But it hasn't been back for 3 or 4 years. But I've never had a problem with them. And one thing that intrigues me, though, I don't know why, I can't explain it, but I think once a person sees a Bigfoot, they are very likely to have more encounters. And I don't know why, but I feel that these creatures, animals, humanoids, whatever people think they are, once they encounter a human being and there's no adverse reaction, I think they don't mind showing themselves to a person. I live on the last ranch up a township road, national forest between me and Jackson, Wyoming, and I know they're up in the mountains, and I know that they probably sit there and watch me down here at this ranch. Go about my chores and everything. They don't bother me, and I don't bother them. I always said I wanted to get a DNA sample. I'd shoot one in the arm or something. I've changed my mind. I really, unless one attacks me, I'm good. Leave them go.
What was it that made you change your mind from doing that?
Well, I had a deal up in Elk City where I got up again to relieve myself. I remember there was we were camping. There was 20 miners there. 20 miners in this campsite. It was called Leggett Creek. It's up on Highway 14 out of Grangeville, heading toward Elk City. I got up, and it was like 20 after 4:30. I had a coonhound with me, a young pup. Anyhow, she got out and did her business, ran around a little bit, and all of a sudden I'm doing my business, and a crack. I thought, what in the heck? And it was over above the access road coming in there, up on a sheer cliff, no less. And I said, it must have been a tree fell over. That cliff or something hit the rocks and broke up. Because it caught me off guard, and I was sleeping. But anyhow, all of a sudden, it cracks again. But it's coming right above everybody's tents and campers and everything else. I went down to 2 buddies. They were from California. They can verify this. And I said, hey, you guys get out of the tent. There's a Bigfoot here. Well, every night before I go to bed, I'd whoop and we'd tell stories. I'd tell them about what happened down there, and they just dismiss it, You have a few beers and then go to bed. And anyhow, this thing must have heard me whooping and decided to come over and check me out. So it's another crack. These guys get scared, and they said, we're going in the tent. This thing's coming right down here. So I ran up. I got in my tent, me and a dog. This Bigfoot, and the tracks were right there. You couldn't mistake them. A big one, like the one up that I made the cast of. Anyhow, it comes down, and it makes 2 more cracks, and one is 40 yards from my tent. All of a sudden, it comes down and stands, and it stands less than 5 feet from my tent. This is what I determined when I woke up in the morning. Well, I actually didn't even sleep after that. But when I got up, I should say. And I could hear it breathing. It sounded like a person breathing that had had asthma or something. Problem with their lung capacity or whatever. Because it was just going around. Almost like a grizzly bear. When a grizzly bear will come up to your tent, you'll hear them, they'll sort of like a huff type deal. You hear them breathing. And anyhow, that's what this was. And me and the dog was in the sleeping bag. I said, I had my hand over her mouth. I said, don't make a noise. And I'm listening to this thing, and it stood there for, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes probably, and walked off. Next morning, that morning, a couple hours later, I got up. And everybody started pulling out of the tents. I went down to Ronnie's and got some coffee. And I said, well, the thing was there. He says, well, yeah, if it's there, it left tracks. I said, well, yeah, I suppose. Well, the grass was about 20 inches high, probably 2 foot high. There was this trash you could see right where he stood, 5 feet from my tent, and walked off. So that was one encounter up by Elk City. And then here 3 years ago, I walk the dog every morning, give her exercise after I feed her. Then I take a cup of coffee with me, and I look for elk and deer tracks. And every once in a while, you'll see an occasional moose. Well, here, I think it was 3 years ago, I looked, and there was a Bigfoot track just plain as day. But unfortunately, I had a different truck. I didn't have no plaster repairs. It was a big track, too. It was probably close to 18 inches by 8 inches wide. It had crossed the road right there. There's 3 game trails right where I camp, and it walked up. Well, I don't know which one it walked up. I went over there, but there was stuff marked because the deer used it and stuff. I couldn't tell which one it used, but yeah, down there by the road there was the track, plain as day. You could see the toes and everything in it. So that was the second deal up in Elk City, and then the last one was up where I mine. There's a big rock there, and I don't know why, but I just put a round quartz rock. Oh, I know. I was going to save it because it was pretty. It had a lot of mica in it. And so I was going to just save it. So I put it up there. And the next morning I went up, there was a little quartz rock sitting on top of my rock. And I looked at that and I says, okay, who's screwing around here, you know? And so I said, well, okay, I'll put another rock next to it. Well, the next morning I went up, there was another rock next to my rock. And that's the last that ever happened. And there was never nothing. And, but I thought that was interesting. So I don't know what that was all about either. But it wasn't anybody playing games because it's right next to the road. Nobody be on that claim and take a chance being seen. So I think something crossed there and just decided to do that or play with me or something. I don't understand it, but that's what happened.
That's some very strange stuff. And every once in a while, you'll hear just strange occurrences. I did want to ask you a question about the prospecting. In those circles, is Bigfoot a thing that is talked about ever? You know, prospectors are out there and they have interactions with something like that.
I would say yes and no.
Okay.
To be honest with you.
Yeah.
Some outfitters, some hunters, some outdoorsmen, some gold miners, all have stories to tell, and some don't believe it. It's like it's like every other aspect of life. Some people, well, I never believed it until it happened to me, and there's nobody that's ever going to tell me that they're not out there because I know I lived it, and once you experience it, once you experience it, it's you experienced it, and you just can't eliminate that experience from your your mental awareness. You just can't do it, and it does affect your life. I think there's not a week goes by. I think, well, I wonder if he's up there watching me to hear, or when I go out scouting. When you go scouting, there hasn't been anybody in the woods for a long time, all summer. So that's when I'm most cautious. Once the hunters get involved, bow hunting, gun season, then there's a lot of activity. And these things, they're more elusive at that period of time. So, but I think when you start initially scouting early in the fall, when nobody's out there, I think you got to be on the ball, and you have to be on the ball for grizzlies now. I've had a lot of encounters with grizzlies. I've had to spray them. I've had them within 10 feet of me. It's you got to watch. So it's dangerous out there. So people that come from out east and want to go and hike the west, they got to realize there's a lot of danger out there. There's lions, there's bears, and there really is Bigfoot. So that's with that. I'd say I'd end this. I'm here to answer any questions you want to ask me about anything, but everything I told you is 100% true and correct.
Absolutely.
So that's what I can tell you.
From what you've experienced over the years and what you've heard in your area, do you have any thoughts about what it is, what Bigfoot might be in that particular area of Idaho? I guess the southeast section.
Well, I believe, first of all, I believe they follow the game herds, because it seems like that's what happens. This one that I casted, I started looking around, and this Bigfoot was sitting up the hill underneath two junipers eating an elk. That's what it was eating on, because the elk was there. I mean, and he drug it. He actually drugged this elk. I could see where he drug it. Now, whether he killed the elk or not, I don't know. I have no idea. But he was eating it. And he had a window of that road, because I sat down right where you could see where he sat down. I sat down right there, and I looked down at the road, and you could see about 4 feet of that dirt road is all you could see. But that's all he needed to see to watch the traffic. And if you'd have to look and it'd be a miracle to spot him up underneath them junipers. And believe me, I can spot stuff, but I would have never spotted him. And I'll tell you something else about Bigfoot. They like apples. In the fall time, I told you I live at the end of the road, and there is one piece of private property that the gentleman's going to give to the Conservancy. He planted a bunch of apple trees up there. It used to be an old homestead, but there's no structures there now. But a fella, a young kid here, him and his sister swear they saw a Bigfoot cross the road going down into that apple orchard. I never thought anything of it, but there's a Macintosh apple tree that's between my place and that apple orchard. And I had these apples spotted, and they need a good frost, and then you go pick them, and make your applesauce and stuff. And so I was waiting for the frost, and the tree was loaded. And I'm the only one who gets apples there. Well, I went up with the four-wheeler and the dog to get the apples, but there wasn't an apple within 18 feet of the ground. They were all picked. And so I said, oh, boy, my bear must have come down. I looked at the tree. There wasn't a claw mark on that tree. Now, you tell me what took all them apples off that tree. And there was no prints around the tree. There was nothing. You answer that. So now that, to me, lends a little credence to this kid's story, because I thought, he's just a kid. He doesn't know what he's talking. Well, now I tend to believe he did see a Bigfoot cross and go down through there. And that Bigfoot was going to them apples.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those stories where everything does line up for sure. Man, it's a part of Idaho that I don't believe we've heard a lot about. Just really fascinating. It'd be interesting to hear if other people reach out about interactions, especially in this reservoir area, the Palisades Reservoir area of Idaho. Well,
I can tell you that I know 4 locals that have run into Bigfoot.
Wow.
Yeah. And I know Becky Cook was a friend of mine. After she wrote about me, she'd come up and visit, and we'd sit on the porch and talk.
Yeah. Wow.
And she'd tell me about new contacts that if got a hold of her about Bigfoots around here. And up in Fall Creek, which I'm looking at Fall Creek right up my ranch window right now, there was a group of people up there, mom, dad, family, the whole deal. And the Bigfoot came right down and crossed right in front of them. They watched it. Oh, I forgot to tell you, I was lion hunting up there 5 years ago. Yeah, I think it was 5 winters ago. And I looked and I said, holy smokes. So I showed Steve. I said, look, there's where Bigfoot ran down through there. He said, that ain't a Bigfoot track. That's something jumping. I said, that's a Bigfoot track. I can tell right now. So I went down. It was dark out. We were spotting where lions crossed the road before daylight. And lo and behold, it was a Bigfoot. He couldn't deny it because there was the tracks. Went right down across that canyon and went up into the timber. And but it was before daylight, that he crossed. And then I'm looking right over across the valley. There's a Girl Scout camp up in there. And those two, they're not tree structures like you would think. I've seen them up. Some guy up in Canada has a YouTube thing that he takes people up, and he's got pictures of Bigfoot and stuff. Only one of those pictures even looks remotely close to the one I saw. But anyhow, he has Bigfoot. I don't know if you'd call him. I guess I'd call him a shelter. But when I first found his shelter, there was a big nest inside of it. It was made out of pine boughs. There's a big round spot inside of it, like where a huge bull owl would lay, a little bit bigger than that. And then outside, there was a smaller one outside the shelter. No, it's actually reversed. The small one was inside and the big one was outside. And this Bigfoot climbed up a pine that's 4 foot in diameter and broke off limbs 3 to 4 inches to make this shelter. And that's the fact. Those limbs that are piled up there, and they're not piled on the ground, they're piled in a teepee like. And they were all broke off up 40, 50 feet, all the way down. And this animal, whoever it was, and they were 4 to 6 inches around. This thing snapped them off that tree and piled them up. And there was the 2 beds there. I was amazed. I took pictures of it. I still have pictures, I believe, of that. And then I took my buddy when we were baiting bear up in there. I said, you got to see this. And I took him, and it was a winter after. And so the winter sort of scrunched it down, but he stood inside of it. And it was amazing how small he looked.
Wow, Dave, some fascinating stuff. I think that we are definitely going to need to keep in touch. You have some really amazing encounters, and you're one of those individuals that people are talking to in the area, which is really important, that there's someone, who's there to listen to everything that's happening. But I just want to say thank you for coming on the show today and for sharing what you've experienced over the years.
Sure. And I appreciate you having me on. Now, if you just, if you'll, after you end this interview, if you just stay on the line and give me your address, I'll mail that today to you and you can take a look at it.
Oh, yeah, sure. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Dave, and I'll go ahead and provide you that information.
Okay. Sounds good, man. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Kyle Meadows, and I am from Webster County, Kentucky, originally from a place called Clay, and it's about 40 minutes from LBL, Land Between the Lakes. That's not where my encounter happened. I've had a few encounters, some Bigfoot, some maybe something else. The one I'm going to tell you about when I was a kid took place when I was about 12 or 13, which I live in a rural area, and I grew up hunting, fishing, everything in the state of Kentucky that you can. And I was really big into coon hunting. And my dad used to go with me all the time when I was a kid until I got about the age of 12, 13. He pretty much quit kind of going hunting with me, period. That goes for everything, deer, turkey, and coon hunting. And I had one dog, a black and tan. He was pretty well trained, and of course, as a kid, I would never scare the woods or scare the dark, and I would go by myself. Dad worked in the mines, so he always had some kind of old work car, work truck, what have you, and I would take his car and go myself. He would let me go myself because I live not too far from where the woods is. And we always called the woods that I went to number 7. And the reason why we called it number 7, there used to be an old number 7 coal mines out there, and it blew up in the early 1900s and killed a bunch of people. And so I load the dog up. I go out there by myself. I cut it loose, walk into the woods with it. It gets to running, and it's running good. And I finally come through. The woods was a little thick, and I ended up coming into a clearing. It wasn't exactly a clearing, but it was like where the trees wasn't so close together. And they were a little further apart, and they were all bigger, mature trees. And so I just sat down there and turned my light out, sat down on the ground, sat up against a tree, and turned my light out and listened to the dog. Well, it wasn't long I heard coyotes open up, and they sounded pretty close, and then the dog quit running, went quiet. It sounded like he was about to tree, and then all of a sudden he quit hearing him. And they'll do that a lot, if coyotes run up on them, especially if they've had any encounters with them. So it wasn't nothing new. So I thought, well, he'll pick back up here in a minute. And I just sat there with my light off. Well, I kept hearing something sounding like it was circling me. So I would take and sit and listen real intent. And I thought, man, your mind's playing tricks on you. You're sitting out here in the dark by yourself. Mind's playing tricks on you. So every now and then I'd flip my light on and look. Wouldn't see nothing. Well, finally, it got the best of me. I just, flipped my light on, look, sit down. I kept hearing it. It sounded like it's circling me. And it would stop. And finally, all of a sudden at once, the treetops like exploded. One tree, and it was shaking. The whole tree was shaking. And treetops, great big tree. And I wasn't thinking at the time that, there ain't a limb on it for 30 feet, probably any of these trees around. But it sounded like if you've ever walked up on a big covey of turkey that's roosting, fly off, but it wasn't no wings flapping. It wasn't nothing like that because it was the whole treetop. And I thought it was my dad or somebody I knew playing a prank on me. At the time, I wasn't thinking that there's no way for whatever, person to climb a tree like that. So eventually I got scared enough, I turned my light on, I'm looking, and I said, hey, whoever it is, you need to stop. Quit, game's over. I got a gun. I had a .22 rifle with a 10-round clip in it. And I said, I've got a gun. I'll shoot, whatever. Well, it would hit the ground. I could hear it, and it would run and go up another tree, and the next tree would start shaking. So finally, I just lowered the gun, waited for the next tree to start shaking, and fired shots off. Well, it didn't stop. Well, I realized right then that it wasn't my dad and it wasn't nobody. When the dog heard the shots, it come back in, so I coupled it and I started trying to walk out. And I would take 2 or 3 steps and the dog would jerk behind me like something was behind us, showing his teeth all bristled up. And I literally drug the dog out of there. And that's kind of my first story. If you'd like to hear more, just email me. Thank you for your time.
If you'd like to share a voicemail to be potentially featured on the show as well, head over to BigfootSocietyPodcast.com and hit the Share Your Encounter button. Just want to take a minute to say thank you for listening to this episode of the Bigfoot Society podcast. Dave's story is one that stays with you, not just because of how close the scream came or the eyes watching him from behind the pine, but because of the silence that followed. The kind of silence that makes you realize there's something out there besides yourself. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to the channel on YouTube, hit the bell icon so you never miss an episode, and share this with a friend who's into hunting, Bigfoot, or Idaho mysteries. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, hit the follow button and maybe leave a positive 5-star review so more folks can find accounts like this. Now, if you or someone you know has had a Bigfoot encounter, especially in Idaho, near Swan Valley or Palisades Reservoir, I'd love to hear it. So email me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. And hey, Sasquatch Summerfest is coming up July 11th through the 12th at Green Waters Park in Oak Ridge, Oregon. I'm actually going to be there for that event. So if you want to tell your Bigfoot account to me face-to-face, that is the time to do it. Bigfoot Society listeners can grab a 2-day pass for the price of a 1-day admission with the code BFS at checkout. Huge thanks to Priscilla and the team for making that happen. Get your tickets now at www.sasquatchsummerfest.com. Thanks again for being part of the Bigfoot Society. Until next time, keep your eyes open, trust your gut, and never stop asking what else might be out there, and see you in the woods.